Good evening, and welcome to you all. I'm Barbara Altman. I'm the director of the Oregon Humanities Center, sponsor of tonight's lecture by Dr. Temple Grandin. I'm simply the introducer of the introducer, so I'll be fast, and then we can get on with the main event. My colleague and Humanities Center fellow, Professor Mark Uno, will actually introduce Temple Grandin, so it's my job to give you just a little background on the event and to communicate some practical information. With this number of people, there's a certain amount of logistics to be taken care of, so we appreciate your goodwill. So first, the practical matters. You've filled out the yellow comment sheet if you wish to, and there are boxes outside of this room and outside room 182 into which you can drop them, and we wish you all good luck in the drawing for that prize. The book by Temple Grandin is Animals Make Us Human, and she was good enough to sign it for us, so that will be the prize for the drawing. Let me see. A couple of other notes for after the lecture. Dr. Grandin will speak for about an hour, and then she's willing to answer talks. But in order to make sure that there is an organized way for doing question and answer, I meant she's going to answer questions. It's been a long day, I beg your pardon. Okay, so Dr. Grandin will do question and answer, but we need to keep that organized. So if you wish to ask a question, we invite you to come to one of the mics sitting in the center aisles. That way, everyone in the overflow rooms can hear you as well, and we can capture it on tape. If you ask from the floor, it will be lost for everybody else who's not in the room. If you cannot get to the mic, we have some cordless mics that one of our staff can bring you. So if you do want to ask a question and you can't come down the stairs, just wave at us and we'll bring you a mic. There will be a book sale of Temple Grandin's work in the hallway outside room 282 after the lecture, and there will be a book signing here at the front of this room. If you would like to get a book signed, please be prepared to line up to do that as well. We're going to line you up in an aisle. What we want to avoid is kind of a rugby scrum at the front of the room, okay? So bear with us when we organize that after the lecture. We also don't want to overwhelm Dr. Grandin. I'm not sure she was expecting quite this kind of turnout. A quick announcement on behalf of a campus organization that wants to reach out to this audience. Disability Services here on campus offers a group called the Social Connectedness Group, intended for students with Asperger's syndrome. It is an educational and social group for anyone interested in practicing social skills, connecting with other students, and finding community on campus. The Social Connectedness Group has leaflets available on our literature table out in the back in case you'd like more details on their meetings. As for tonight's lectureship and our wonderful speaker, how very fortunate we are that we happened to invite Temple Grandin for this particular week, just after HBO premiered a film biography of her on TV on Saturday night, February 6th, and just after the New York Times featured Grandin and a review of that biopic in their Friday edition, February the 5th, and just after National Public Radio rebroadcast Grandin's interview with Terry Gross on Friday last week as well. We're clearly riding the crest of a wave. Dr. Grandin's visit to the University of Oregon comes in conjunction with a class entitled The Bull in the China Shop, the Oxen at the Intersection of Nature, Society, and Religion. That course is being taught right now by Professor Mark Uno of the Department of Religious Studies. The course was developed as his project for the Coleman-Guiteau Teaching Fellowship, endowed by very generous and long-term donors to the Humanities Center. And I hope those donors are very pleased to see what their gift has brought about tonight by allowing the broader community, as well as Professor Uno's students, the chance to benefit from Dr. Grandin's unique combination of expertise. Grandin was kind enough to do an interview with me this morning for our TV show, UO Today. It was a great interview. That show will air across Oregon the week of March 29th, but it will be available on the UO channel in about 2 weeks from now, so please watch it if you're interested. I want to thank the wonderful staff of the Oregon Humanities Center for all the hard work that went into organizing this event. That means principally Julia Hayden, Melissa Gustafson, Peg Gearhart, and Lindsay Hendrickson, but we have a whole raft of helpers who are out there doing crowd control for us and helping lead the traffic. Now, finally, I'd like to ask Professor Mark Uno to come to the podium to introduce Temple Grandin. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
I'm going to keep this Short and sweet because we want to maximize our time with Professor Grandin. It is a great pleasure and honor to introduce her. Professor Grandin is Professor of Animal Science at Colorado State University, and she will be presenting this evening on my experiences with autism and animals. Dr. Grandin is a consultant and designer of livestock handling facilities. She has devoted her career to improving conditions at large processing plants that slaughter some of the 40 billion pounds of cattle and pigs for human consumption each year in the U.S. She is a strong advocate for more humane livestock handling and has designed numerous innovations at such facilities that help to reduce stress in the animals during their final minutes. Dr. Grandin's mission is deeply connected to her autism, and she credits this developmental brain disorder for her success as a scientist. She is the author of Emergence, labeled Autistic, Thinking in Pictures, and most recently, with Katherine Johnson, Animals Make Us Human. The film Temple Grandin, as mentioned previously, was based upon her memoirs, aired on HBO February 6th, and of course, we planned this event to coincide exactly in this kind of timing. Please welcome Dr. Grandin.
Well, it's really good to be here. I want to make sure this cordless mic's working, because if it's not working in the other rooms, I want someone to tell me right away, because I have absolutely no way of knowing. Okay. One of the things you might wonder is, what does autism have to do with animal behavior? See, the thing is, I'm a sensory-based thinker. Don't think in words. Think in pictures. You want to understand somebody that's nonverbal, you got to get away from language. A very basic principle in handling animals is calm animals. They're a whole lot easier to handle. You know, you want to prevent fear, those sort of things in the first place. An animal's world is sensory-based. And, you know, if you're dealing with a child that's nonverbal, now something going wrong with this mic. And if you're dealing with a child that's nonverbal, it's not a language-based world. When I wrote one of my earlier books, Thinking in Pictures, and I started interviewing other people about how they think, I was shocked to find out that I think in very, very specific pictures. There's no generalized thinking. See, my thinking's bottom up. I take lots of sensory details and I put them together to make wholes. And that's how I do problem solving. Okay, so-called normal people, it's top down, and you get the hypothesis first. Autism is a very complex disorder, going all the way from brilliant scientists and computer people. Einstein, in today's educational system, would definitely be diagnosed as being autistic, all the way down to people that are nonverbal. It's a continuum of traits. There's kind of two ways you could make a brain. You can make a brain to be more social, or you can make a brain to be more thinking and cognitive. And there's going to be a wide variation within normal variation. You know, what's the difference between Asperger's, geeks, and nerds? It's the same thing. And there's a lot of controversy today about autism increases. The Asperger's has always been here. That's just increased diagnosis. I mean, half of Silicon Valley's got a little bit of that. I think there has been some severe autism that has increased. I think in pictures. You know, this little boy gave me this picture showing an old-fashioned 16-millimeter movie projector inside his head. And I've had teachers say, well, how can I get the pictures out of his head? Well, you can't. And in the movie, Mick Jackson, the director, did an absolutely marvelous job of showing how I think. Like the word shoe is said, and of course the movie's all in the 60s and the 70s, so all these like 50s, 60s, and 70s shoes appear, just like a series of slides. My mind works just like Google for images. You know, a search engine works the same way as my mind works. It's associative. It's not linear. And, well, who do you think made a search engine in the first place? Thing is, to understand animals, you've got to attend to a whole lot of sensory details. I've had parents say to me, well, my nonverbal kid's psychic because he knows, you know, that I'm getting ready to leave the house even before I leave. Well, even before the purse and the keys get picked up, there's all the newspapers getting chucked away, and they're cleaning up the last of the dishes. He knows what's going to be happening before it's time to leave. Now, in humans, language covers up the sensory-based thinking that, you know, that we share with animals. So there's a certain type of Alzheimer's where the frontal cortex gets destroyed, language parts of the brain get destroyed, and art ability may come out of somebody that had no previous interest in art. fact, there's a reference there, Miller et al. In Neurology Journal. You know, I'm sorry, I'm very, very tired. I had a real mess at the airport the other day, yesterday, with a delayed flight for 12 hours. So I'm pretty tired, and I get distracted. Any little motion in the room, I get distracted. And this is another problem in autism. I have a real problem with ruling out, a lot of sensory distractions. And in the movie, they do a very great job of showing those kind of problems. And when I get tired, these problems get a whole lot worse. And I was hoping to get a good night's sleep last night, but I had a plane take off out of Denver. It gets up to altitude and then has to come back to the airport because the door for the landing gear is not closed. Okay, watch, I tell people to work with animals. You got to watch the body posture. Look at how the animals have an ear on each other. The horse and the zebra have an ear on each other, and the other ear is on me. Watch that body posture. How do you know if an animal's getting scared? Well, you see the whites of its eyes, it's quivering, the tail's flicking. The grazing animals, the tail, when it's flicking around, there's no flies, that's a sign of it's getting upset. Now, some of the first work that I did with cattle, I noticed the little distractions that would make the animals balk. Okay, here's an animal coming out of a chute, balking at a blob of sunlight. A lot of people's attitude was get in there and just force it more and more. Well, that's not the thing to do. Here's a little piece of chain hanging down in a chute. Well, 35 years later, I still have to talk about removing chains from chutes because people are not taking it out. You have that moving like this, they're not going to go in. That can wreck the state-of-the-art system. Shirts hung on the fence, puddles, reflections, sometimes changing lighting can make a difference. It's looking for these details. In fact, in Animals in Translation, I had to make whole checklists of these things because people don't see it. Maybe that's going to give me job security. Maybe that's a good thing. And I would get down into the chutes to see what the cattle are seeing. And on a sunny day, you got lots of shadows, and they can see people. Cloudy day, you don't have those shadows. Windy days, you got a lot of leaves and things blowing around. Rapid movement attracts attention. Now, how do you form a concept? I got all these discrete pictures floating around in my head. How do I make a concept out of all those visual things? Because they're all specific. When I asked people the question, think about a church steeple, and I did this when I wrote Thinking in Pictures, I was shocked to find out that most people get this generalized generic steeple. I only see specific ones. Now, mostly if I ask you to think about your own car or house or dog, yeah, you see that. But when I ask you something that you see every day but you don't pay that much attention to it, you tend to get a more generic image. In fact, research now shows that a lot of people on the spectrum think with the primary visual cortex. And I have found that there's like 3 kinds of specialist brains in autism. There's a visual thinker like me, who thinks in photorealistic pictures, and is often really poor at algebra, sometimes can do geometry. That was one mistake that was made in my education. I never got a chance to go back and do geometry. Another kind of mind is the pattern thinker. It's like more abstract visual thinking. Think chess, think origami. That's the pattern thinker. They have difficulty with reading. And then a third type is the word thinker. They'll know all kinds of facts about their favorite subject, whether it be weather or sports or dinosaurs, whatever it is. Now, to form a concept, when you have all these visual images floating around the head, you got to sort the pictures into categories. Making categories, that's the beginning of concept formation. So when I was a little kid, how did I know that a dog wasn't a cat? Well, I did it by size originally. But when our next door neighbor's got a dachshund, I had to find a visual feature that every single dachshund has that none of the cats have. And every dachshund, no matter how teeny-weeny, has got exactly the same nose shape. Man on the horse, man on foot. The horse perceives that as 2 separate file folders. Now, the thing is, sometimes autistic kids do the same thing. I've had parents say to me, oh, he knows the rule not to run across the street at home, but he runs across the street at Granny's house and at church and at school. You've got to teach him in many different places. Just like you have to teach your dog that when you say sit, in the park you obey, Out in the street you obey, in the house you obey, in the backyard you obey. Because if you only taught the dog in the house to sit, he might not obey outside the house. You see, to get a concept, you got to put a whole lot of examples into the sit box. It's just that simple. You know, I've seen situations with horses where you could ride the horse, but he was horrible for veterinary work because he'd been abused by the horseshoer. Or you have a horse that was abused by the rider, and you can't ride this horse because he gets scared, but you can do all the veterinary work and shoeing on him. On the leash, off the leash. Dogs often treat that as two separate categories. Off the leash, I go play. On the leash, I defend my owner. Here's a horse that was deathly afraid of black cowboy hats because he was abused by somebody wearing a black cowboy hat. And it's very specific. White cowboy hats were just fine. Black cowboy hats were bad. Another thing that's being really overlooked in autism and also dyslexia and some of the other disorders is the sensory issues. Loud sounds hurt my ears. I could get distracted. I can't screen out background noise. I don't hear very well. Like if a cell phone rings over here, it attracts my attention. Attention shifting is much more slow. It takes me longer to shift back and forth between two different things. And when I get tired, this all gets a whole lot worse. You know, and then if there's one area where scientific research is needed, it is the sensory issues. Now, maybe a kid went into this room last week and the fire alarm went off. So now every time he sees the fire alarm box, he's getting real scared because he's afraid it might go off and blast his ears out. Now, the thing is, this horse got afraid of black hats. I'm going to bet you that a large black purse kind of like this also could cause a problem because it's kind of similar in shape. You know, these fears can kind of generalize in a kind of a visually specific way. Here's just some examples of specific fear memories. Dogs often get afraid of the place where they were hit by a car. Well, that's due to lack of, you know, they don't have as much association cortex as we have. One horse got afraid of long, straight objects. Lead ropes hanging down, broom handles, microphone stands, anything that was a long, straight thing became really scary. Because, you know, there were parrots. There were some parrots that were afraid of any kind of long, like stick things because they'd been wild caught and they were knocked out of the nest with a stick. So anything that was stick-like, they were afraid of. The parrots that had been reared in captivity, they had no fear of sticks. Okay, a common example, just showing how an animal can make categories. And people on the autism spectrum do the same thing. This is a really awful kind of bit. I went on the internet and I found all these different pictures, and boy, there's some terrible bits being sold. Now, this is a horrible bit. They ought to be banned. But if a horse has been really worked over with this and has its mouth really hurt with it, any bit that's jointed often will become scary. Okay, that's a jointed bit. Okay, now you got a bit that's one piece versus one that's jointed. It's a different feeling picture. If you were to put these in your hand and shut your eyes, they're going to feel differently. And sometimes you can just get rid of the jointed ones, and then you're fine. You get out of the fear category. Notice the horse was afraid of long, straight things. Well, the vertical things were especially bad. That's the long, straight category. Now, how about this kid's show stick, you know, with this show animal? It's horizontal, you know. Should you be afraid of that? He might not. You see, these fear memories are very specific because they're sensory-based. So what I'm trying to do is to get you to enter a world without language. If you're working with autistic kids that don't have language, you've got to get away from language. You know, and I've had people say to me, oh, you don't have enough captions and things on the slides. Well, I'm trying to get you away from language. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay, there was this one horse who was scared to death of naked white saddle pads. If you put tack on top, see, it's a different picture. Tack on top is a different picture than a naked pad. And these are the best I could find on the internet, you know, looking through all the horse equipment catalogs. But I want to get it across to you the idea that it's a different picture or it's a different sound. I know quite a few animals where maybe gas vehicles were fine, but diesel-powered anything was scary. You know, a diesel vehicle was associated with something bad. So anything that had a diesel engine was bad. You know, that they read, you know, gas engine and diesel engine, they knew the difference. It didn't matter whether it was a truck, a tractor, didn't matter what the equipment was. But diesel engines were really bad. Now, the thing is, fear memories cannot be erased. And one of the primary emotions in autism is fear. And that is shown very, very nicely in the Claire Danes movie. And she did a great job of playing me. It was sort of like going in a time machine back to the 60s and the 70s. Claire Danes became me. She spent hours watching old videotapes that I gave her. I spent about 6 hours with her. She was going around the iPod for hours listening to my voice. And she got into that part in a way that most, actors wouldn't be doing that. But fear, sensory overload, there's a scene in the cafeteria. The movie does a great job of showing the sensory issues, or the fear being the main emotion. And there's a problem in my nervous system where my nervous system was always looking for danger. The fight or flight system was turned on all the time for no reason. It's like a biological defect. That is now controlled with antidepressant medication. That movie's all before taking antidepressants. I've been on antidepressants for 30 years. And there's a big, huge article in Newsweek that kind of says they don't work. Yeah, depression, I didn't have depression. I'll tell you where they work. A little Prozac or a little Zoloft, that can really work. It's for anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive. That's where it really works. They say, well, how do you control the pictures in your mind? I still think in pictures, but they come up a bit more slowly now and a bit more controlled. But the trick with antidepressant medication in autism is tiny doses. Now, my book, Thinking in Pictures, is out there. There's two different covers, one with Claire Dane on it, and one is the original cover. It's the exact same book inside. It's a 2006 edition of Thinking in Pictures. And I go over all of the medical issues in there. And if you have any questions about medication, I strongly recommend getting that book. Okay, you handle animals roughly, you get them really scared, their stress hormones go way up. You handle animals quietly, the stress hormones will be a lot less. When you force them to do something, the stress hormones can go off the chart. When an animal voluntarily cooperates, then the stress hormones from the fear go way, 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 way down. And, now that's kind of distraction I have a hard time dealing with, because especially when I'm tired, I have attention-shifting slowness. I hear that cell phone, now I'm imagining it crunching underneath my foot, so I grind that cell phone into the floor. And I've had people that text in my class. I've asked them to read their emails and their texts to the class, and that gets the phones closed really quickly. But you have especially someone that's nonverbal and they have a, behavior problem. It's massive fear or massive anger, but a lot of it's fear. Something sets them off and they're in a gigantic fear, just like an animal is. And when the animal voluntarily cooperates, and we've trained animals to cooperate in veterinary procedures, then you don't get all that fear stress. And here's working at the Denver Zoo. This is some work that we did in the mid-90s, and when we did this, everybody thought we were crazy, and there'd be no way you could train antelopes to actually cooperate with blood sampling because they were so flighty. We trained them. But the thing is, you had to introduce each new thing very slowly, and boy, they were specific. Oh, you want specific on an animal, that's pronghorn antelope. We had some baby pronghorns, and they were reared from, little fawns. And Canada geese were flying over their pen. And if a Canada geese went this way, it was fine, but if they went this way, they panicked. And then finally, enough Canada geese flew over there where they started to ignore them. Big objects that moved rapidly. That caused the most problem. And we had kind of a little bad situation on the movie set. I was down there for 2.5 days, and they wanted to get some PR pictures with Claire Danes. And they had all these beautiful black Angus cattle. They were very well trained. All this stuff was on the movie set. And then they had this one Halterbroek heifer that they got, and she was not trained to 4x8 white reflector boards. They thought that trained to vehicles would equal trained to reflector boards. So I kneeled down to get the heifer to lick me. She's just ready to lick me, and this grip takes this 4x8 panel and goes, and that heifer almost went on my head. And I turned around and screamed at him, and he moved it again. I'm not going to say what I said after that, because it wasn't very nice. But this was an example of just how specific animal thinking is. Trained to vehicles, and they had every kind of a vehicle you could imagine, cars, trucks, big trucks. That's not the same as reflectoports. You know, animal thinking is specific. They can be trained to reflectoports. And the best way to do that would be to just lean them up against the side of the corral fence, let the animal approach it, maybe knock them over. There's plenty of room for the animal to jump away. Put them on light stands, and they've got to learn to tolerate them getting knocked over. They can be trained to that. But that needs to be done at home. And the other thing I found, like different kinds of cups, whether this is this kind of glass or it's a Coke can, that doesn't seem to matter. The small objects, unless the object specifically is associated with something really bad, that's not a problem. Okay, you probably saw a lot of things in the movie about my squeezing machine. Well, of course, I've worked on a lot of restraint devices for animals, and fear of falling. I cannot emphasize, no matter what animal you're working with, the importance of non-slip flooring. Jerky motion scares. There's also an optimal pressure. Like when I got in my squeezing machine, the pressure all over my body calmed down my nervous system. And not everybody on the autism spectrum responds to deep pressure. But there's probably about a third of them that do. And the secret to using deep pressure is 20 minutes on, and then you've got to take it off for a while. 20 minutes on, and then you take it off. Because if you do it too long, it's not going to work. And I found that these rules of restraint apply to any animal. I had one veterinary student come back, and he says they call me the kitty whisperer because you can deal with all the cats that scratch and bite. Animals definitely have emotions. And in the first chapter of Animals Make Us Human, Katherine Johnson and I discuss animal emotions. Well, let's just look at the hard science here. Prozac works on dogs. Same way it works on people. The neurotransmitters are the same. The emotional circuits in the subcortex of mammal brains have all been mapped. And guess what? They were mapped years ago. But one of the big problems we got in science is neuroscience has their journals over here, veterinarians have got their journals here, animal behavior has their journals over here, and nobody communicates. There's a real problem in science and many fields of not communicating across disciplines. Now, something I've always tried to do is like dig stuff out of research, figure out how I can apply it, out in real life. Well, Katherine Johnson found Jack Panskep's old book, Effective Neuroscience. And I go, wait a minute, this just explains so much stuff. I mean, it just seems so simple and beautiful and logical. And then I was afraid everybody would take chapter one, just rip it all apart. So, boy, I worked on the footnotes and went back and found the original studies for fear and rage and the different emotional systems. Okay, here are the core emotions. And some of you will say you're being anthropomorphic. No, I'm not. This is neuroscience. That just took, 25 years to dig some of the stuff out of the literature. Fear. Circuits are completely mapped. There's a scientist named Joseph Ledoux. There's probably 500 papers on fear circuits. It's totally mapped. It's science. How about anger? That was mapped in the 60s. I studied that in experimental psychology when I was in college. But you know what? They called it fake rage. They called it sham rage. People didn't want to admit that when they stimulated the cat in the, in the thalamus, that it would make rage. Separation anxiety. That's another set of circuits. And it's so different from fear. It's a different emotion from fear. Because you can actually breed two lines of quail. You can breed a line of quail that's high separation anxiety, low separation anxiety, high fear, low fear. It's separate genetically, and they can be separated out with just old-fashioned breeding. Then seeking. If you had all these negative emotions, the animal would just stay in one place and wouldn't do anything. Seeking, that's what makes an animal approach a novel thing. Okay, you want to train the animal to tolerate the reflectoports, so you take it out there and lay it out there in the pasture. You know what? Every cow in the pasture will go up to that. And then if the wind knocked it over, they'd jump back, but you do it in a big pasture where there's plenty of room to jump back, where there's no safety issue. And then you also have sex. You've got mother-young nurturing behavior, that's the oxytocin system, and you have play. This has all been mapped. Now, some new research that we put in the paperback edition of Animals Make Us Human involves the nucleus accumbens. They used to think this was the pleasure center. It's now found to be a part of the brain that can teeter-totter back and forth between fear and seeking. The animal either approaches or it gets scared. Human beings have the same thing. If you put a clipboard with some paper in it out in the pasture in a feed yard full of cattle, they come up to it. And when the wind blows the paper, they get scared. And I used to think about this back when I first did this in 1998. It's like a switch between fear and seeking. Well, the circuit's been found. It is a switch, and the references in Animals Make Us Human. Now, when an animal orients like this, the brain makes a decision. Do I seek or do I flee? And look at the ears there. You got one ear on the photographer and the other ear watching what's going on out in the background. And I had a situation in my own life where I could see the seeking system and the fear system, it flipped from one to the other. I'm driving along the right-hand lane of the interstate, and some idiot passes me with a little low trailer. Just as he passes me, 2x6 this long comes off the trailer, comes skittering across the highway like this. I lock onto that board like radar. I'm not scared at all. I lock on and I move the car over like this, and I manage to straddle it. No accident avoided. And then as soon as I avoided the accident, fear took over. And every bit of bad language you can possibly imagine was coming out of my mouth. Now, when you're troubleshooting behavior, you've got to figure out what's motivating an animal. You also got to figure out what's motivating the kid with autism, especially one that's nonverbal. What's motivating it? Well, is it fear? When you punish fear, it makes it worse. Okay, let's get back to the kid with autism. What's motivating it? The first thing you have to do is rule out hidden painful medical problems. They got to be ruled out first. Acid reflux, that's big number one. Yeast infections, urinary tract infections, sinus infections, ear infections, toothaches. You got to get that stuff fixed. Then the next thing is sensory. There are some that are not going to tolerate going into the Walmart. They're going to go into sensory overload. It's very variable. Some kids are bothered by fluorescent lights, other kids are not. Sensory issues are very variable. They range from nuisances all the way up to absolutely, totally debilitating. And you've got to make sure it's not sensory, or the fear of sensory. Doesn't want to go near that cell phone because that ringtone blasts them. Okay, then 3 other motivations that are behavioral. Getting attention, getting out of doing something, and frustration because they can't communicate. So you've got to figure out what's motivating behavior. Let's say you have a dog. Is it aggression or is it fear? You need to figure that out. What's motivating it? Should an owner be present in the vet's office? It's going to depend upon what's motivating the dog. If it's scared, maybe the owner should be there. If it's some drug dealer's, really bad, aggressive, nasty dog, you don't want the drug dealer there because that dog's going to feel that he has to protect the owner against the vet. So then that drug dealer needs to be 5 miles down the road, not in the waiting room, 5 miles down the road, because that dog's going to know when the car leaves. How do we prevent abnormal behavior? Animals lots of times will do abnormal behavior that's very similar to autistic behavior. Autistic kids, and I did this, do the repetitive behavior because it shuts out the hurtful stimuli. But the problem is, if you let an autistic kid sit there all day and do abnormal behavior, they're never going to develop. This is why it's so important to get like 20 hours a week or more with little kids, the 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, of early intervention. I was allowed to have an hour after lunch I could revert back to autism. But the rest of the time, Mother was doing turn-taking games with me and my sister. I was learning with a speech therapist. You got to keep these kids engaged. The animals do it because they're in an environment without enough stimulation. The autistic person does it because they're overloaded with stimulation. Now, you got to figure out what an animal needs. You might have a little gerbil and he's digging in the side of the cage, so you give him more dirt. He doesn't want dirt. He wants cover. He has an instinct to hide from aerial predators. So put a piece of cardboard over the top of the cage. That'll probably stop it. But this is why it's important to figure out what's motivating it. And the hen wants a private place to lay her eggs. She has an instinct to hide, so the fox ain't going to eat her. So she wants a little place to get behind with a solid side on it. What do dogs need? Lots of companionship. They don't handle being home alone very well. They need lots of activities. Dogs have been bred to be hyper-social animals. And they're much more attentive to us socially than wolves are. We've bred them that way. There's some interesting new research on that. What do horses need? Horse is a pretty high fear animal. Your grazing animals are higher fear than the carnivorous animals like the dog. But what do they need? They need lots of, things to do with their mouth. What does a horse do out in the wild? It spends 7 hours a day grazing. And then we feed it concentrates and it gobbles it up in 5 minutes, and then you wonder why he's cribbing and eating the stall down. You got to look at what motivates the animal out in nature. Now, the polar bear, that's a seeker. It walks for miles. So it's going to get a stereotypy of walking. But that's driven by seeking. You got to give them things to do. Now, one of the things I've learned about animals that are reared alone are often vicious on attacking other animals and sometimes even attacking people. It's very important to get dogs socialized, puppies socialized, and they got to learn toddlers are people too. That this little person is also a person. Otherwise, you could get into some dangerous prey behavior. And why is the dairy bull the bull that attacks so many people? Because he thinks he's a human being if he's raised by hand. We want these big guys growing up knowing that they're cattle. So when they get to be sexually mature, they don't go after people. And unfortunately, sometimes they go after the person that raised them. Steers, you don't have to worry about it. Cows, it isn't a problem. It's a guy thing with intact male grazing animals. We already talked about the problems with dogs not getting enough socialization. The thing is, these are social animals. Okay, in the movie, it shows all this engineering stuff I do. So I design all these really nice facilities. But one of the things that drove me absolutely crazy is I put in a nice piece of equipment, and man, about 25 or 30% of my clients tear up all the equipment, torture the cattle, and it's just terrible. And then there was about 20% of people that were always good. And then there's a big bunch in between that if you manage them and constantly monitor them, you can keep the handling and the treatment of the livestock good. And I've also found there's about 10% of people that maybe just shouldn't be handling animals. They like to be mean to them. Just shouldn't be there. But one of the big problems that we have is I'd go out to the startup and I'd get everything beautiful, and then I'd come back a year later and the handling was awful. They were screaming and yelling and too many electric prodders. People slowly drifted back into these bad practices. And the thing is, they didn't realize they were doing it. I call that bad becoming normal. In the dairy industry, for example, 30 years ago, 5% of the cows are lame. Now, 24% of the national dairy herd is lame. How do you get in a mess like that? It slowly got worse. So the big thing I'm working on now, because people ask me, what am I doing now? I'm working on management systems for the stockmanship. I got to get people to manage and work the things right. Good equipment's only half the equation. The other half of the equation is people need to understand animal behavior, and we've got to be managing stuff. And you manage things that you measure. So I came up with a scoring system for animal handling and for meat plants. It's called the American Meat Institute Guidelines. In fact, we're working on a 3rd edition right now. I've got a conference call tomorrow morning in the LA airport. That should be fun. But what it does is we measure simple things, like how many cattle fall down. If more than 1% of the cattle fall down, they fail the audit. It could be due to a slippery floor. It could be due to rough handling. I'm not going to tell a plant how to build their floor, but if more than 1% of the cattle fall down, they fail, period. If they've got more than three cattle mooing and vocalizing out of 100 cattle going up in the stunning box, they're going to fail. But you see, the thing is, mooing is an outcome of a lot of bad things. Electric prods, slamming doors on them, falling down. There's a lot of different things that can make that mooing. See, but you got to figure out what are the relatively few simple things that you need to measure. Now, in designing variables, if you're writing guidelines for animal welfare, for the environment, or for anything, the tendency now, and I agree with this, is instead of telling people how to build stuff, you measure what are called outcome measures. How many cattle are mooing? How many times did the stunner not work? How many times did they slam a gate on them or something? I can measure that sort of thing. These things can never be zero. I can never have 0 falls. I can get it down to a really low level, but it can never be 0. It's a continuous variable. And, then you can just ban some practices, like sow gestation stalls or docking dairy cows. That's easy to write. But the thing about these continuous variables is they can't be perfect. So you have to put a limit on I'm really having a problem with you rocking. It just absolutely drives me crazy. I'm sorry. When I'm tired, I can't screen out the rapid motion. I just absolutely can't screen it out. And I'm very, very tired right now, and I'm having problems with that. So now you're seeing, but now you're seeing some of the, autistic sensory problems. And these tend to get a whole lot worse when I get tired. Yeah, but the thing is, I can't screen that out, and I have to look at the camera. You see, if I didn't have to look at the camera, I'd be turning my back to you. That's how I would deal with it. I'd be looking at the lady here in the striped shirt instead of looking at you. But I can't screen it out. In the movie it showed the sliding doors, and well, you see, that's sensory. Okay, the old way of doing guidelines was to have lots of, we'll tell them exactly how to build something. Okay, we're getting away from that now, going more towards the outcome-based things. Okay, if you're going to use an outcome-based standard and environment, I don't tell somebody what kind of wastewater treatment plant they have to have. You measure, well, how clean is the water? That's the outcome. Now, you can never have zero pollutants, but it has to be down to an extremely low level. That is an outcome measure. It's the same thing. Okay, you measure air quality, you measure water quality. Those are outcome-based measures. And I think that's a better way to do things because it doesn't block innovation. If I tell somebody, you got to have this kind of wastewater treatment plant, that blocks innovation. And then you have some bad practices you just have to ban. I was on the World Animal Health Organization Slaughter Committee, and I said, look, we've got to have some strong wording about some really, really bad stuff. Like in developing countries that cut the leg tendons on cattle to restrain them. We've got to just come out and say, no, you're just absolutely not going to do that. That's just terrible. Okay, here are some outcome measures of stockmanship. Percentage of cattle that fall, percentage running, percentage vocalizing, percentage of the electric prod, percentage that hit fences. These are things I can measure. Am I getting better or am I getting worse? And the National Cattlemen's Beef Association has adopted a measurement system like this for feedlots. And some of the ranchers are going, oh, I don't want to do this, or I know how to handle cattle. But the thing is, you start measuring it, and you can find out, I had 10% of our cattle fell down during handling. That would be pretty bad on a ranch. But you measure it, then you can tell, is it getting better or is it getting worse? Okay, here are some outcome measures of fear. Is the animal, horses or cattle, whites of the eyes show? Is it switching its tail? Now in dogs, tail wiggling like this, that's happy for dogs. This is where you have a species difference. When horses and cattle, if there's no flies, the more it's flicking, the more upset they're getting, quivering skin, sweating, flaring nostrils. Those are things I can train people to measure that too. I can also measure if I make a change, did it improve a situation? So I'd go around to these meat plants because when I worked with McDonald's on implementing the McDonald's scoring system, I had to make the junky old plants work too. It made be a big fat conflict of interest if I walked in there and said, well, I'm going to just tear out the whole front end of your plant. You got to spend $1 million rebuilding the front end of your plant. No, I had to make the old things work. And I found that I could fix a lot of stuff with non-slip flooring and a lot of steel rods welded on the floor and stun boxes and places like that. Oh, we did a lot of portable lights on cords stuck up with duct tape. It's amazing what they can do. And lots of cardboard put up in strategic places. I was amazed at the number of plants I could fix with lights and cardboard. It's just amazing. This particular plant right here, we had well-trained handlers, and they only used the electric prod on the pigs that balked. I taped a light up over the entrance of their chute, and we went from 38% being prodded down to 4% being prodded, just by lighting up the entrance. Another place, we moved some lights to get rid of reflections, and the prod score was, went way, way down. And there's just an example of how I could put the lights up. Sometimes it's very simple changes like this, and we could make some of the older plants work as long as they weren't overloaded and understaffed. A lot of people automatically assume that the large meat plants are bad. Nope, you can have a bad small meat plant. I've seen some horrendous small ones too. It's understaffed and overloaded that's bad. If you're set up, you run at a certain speed and you staff it and design it right, it can work fine. There's also big differences in whether the animals are easy to drive versus hard to drive animals. You know, I've had situations in some of the plants where these pigs are growing so fast and so weak they can't walk one end of the plant to the other. Some of it's genetics, some of it's leg conformation, some of it's feed additives. But this is where you push the biology too hard. You know, I've got big problems with that. We're going to have to push back to the producer and say you're going to need to do some things to correct this problem. And it is correctable. Now, the other thing about designing good guidelines, they must not be vague. This is where the normal human mind gets vague. The normal human mind drops out the details. There's actually been brain scan research on that. And the thing I constantly fight are these vague guidelines. What's proper? I don't know what that is. How do I train somebody to judge proper? My principle is you got to pick out the really, really, really important things. And then they got to get a passing score on all of those important things. And for the meat plant, it'd be stunning, insensibility, electric prod use, vocalization, and falling. I can tell you one of the critical control points for aircraft maintenance. I can tell you what it is right now. One word, it's in the tails. There's been 6 fatal crashes in the last 20 years where the tail either came off or the steering devices inside the tail messed up. Total loss of aircraft. You know, this is where the no weather problem, no pilot error. This is where this was maintenance. And the thing is, you see I'm walking around the plane now in mind, the pilot cannot see all this like really critical stuff. It's all inside the tail. You can't see it. He can walk around the plane all he wants, he's never going to see it. You know, you start looking at visual, to me that's like so obvious. But there's a tendency on a lot of these audits to turn it all into a paperwork audit. And I find that people have a hard time in their mind categorizing serious problems from minor ones. And I don't want a situation where they get all their paperwork right and the farmer, the plant's a great big mess. I've seen that. I've gone out to places where their paperwork was perfect, their training documents are perfect, and the plant was just absolutely terrible. I put the emphasis on the things I can see. Things I can see more than paperwork. Yeah, there's a place for paperwork, but you don't replace direct observation with paperwork. All right, here are some animal-based outcome measures I'm going to use on a farm. How many skinny animals have I got? I've got a problem with skinny animals. How many lame ones have I got? I can count them. How many dirty animals have I got? Sores and lesions. You know, this is easy. I can train people in a 2-day workshop to do this. And the practical reality is I have to train them in a 2-day workshop. I'm an auditor instructor. It's a 2-day workshop, and then they got to shadow 3 other people and go to like 3 other places with them. Code condition, I'm getting concerned in organic that some people are getting too much tolerance of internal and external parasites and bald spots on cattle, so I can score them for parasites. And ammonia levels, that I have to use an input measure. It's 25 parts per million. That's the OSHA safety standard. Goes over that, somebody needs to fail an audit. And the thing is, you got to pass on all of these things. I mean, you can't have something where you got a bunch of half-dead, skinny dairy cows. But the thing is, none of these things are going to be at 0. There's always, you have to allow a little bit of it. Now, the thing that makes lameness a good outcome measure is that it's caused by many, many different things. Okay, the veterinarians and the managers have to figure out how to fix it. So you got to spend a lot of time going to school to learn that. But the auditor can do the screening test, tell you that you got a problem. I am very concerned about overloading the animal's biology. Okay, let's look at domestic dogs. We're breeding all kinds of disgusting problems. Bulldogs now that are totally dysfunctional. Can't breathe, can't walk, can't have their babies naturally. They weren't that way 20, 30 years ago. This is something where people slowly kept breeding for the more extreme traits. So this is bad becoming normal. We've done that with some of our farm animals. You know, breeding chickens to grow faster and faster, and then they get lame. And actually, the chicken industry has corrected some of that, in fairness to the chicken industry. And dogs are just as bad. Pet people don't get off the hook either. But the thing is, this happens slowly. You overselect a single trait, you will wreck your animal. It's just that simple. And here are some of the bad things you can get. Skinny dairy cows, and they're just bred just for milk production. Weak animals, neurological problems. I can't believe some of the problems that dogs have got now. Medical problems, weird medical problems, skin conditions, all kinds of weird stuff. And what happened to those pigs' ears? Another pig ate them for dinner. And this is where traits can be linked in weird ways. We bred for a lean pig that would grow really fast. We also bred for a mean pig that bit tails more and fought more. Now, nobody did that on purpose, but traits can be linked, and you can get into these problems. And how do you get into the big mess where you could have 50% of your pigs lame? Those breeders that were breeding those pigs never saw any other pigs. One of the reasons why I saw it first is I'd go to a meat plant, and I'd see pigs from just tons of different places. So I'd see it. And they'd say, well, you're not even a geneticist. You're not qualified to talk about this. I said, I have one qualification. I've seen more pigs in more different places than you've ever seen. That's my qualification. Oh, people think that's real pretty. You breed two of those together, you're going to get deaf animals, get neurological problems, epilepsy, everything else. You know, I look at some of these extreme Shar-Peis and things like that. One of the students had that on her screensaver. I don't know, I thought deformed freakazoid. I mean, I feel very strongly we got to breed animals that don't have stuff wrong with them. Problems breathing, lameness, weakness, neurological problems, skin rashes, die from like weird diseases that dogs never had before. I have problems with that. And the dairy cows, now that's a real beautiful, so most dairy cows are not out on pasture, but what's happening with dairy cows today, we're pushing them so much sometimes they're only lasting for 2 years of milking. It takes you 2 years to produce a dairy cow, and then you only use her for 2 years. That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, this is getting into some of my books. Improving Animal Welfare, Practical Approach, that's strictly a book for people who have to implement programs. Now this brings up an important thing. I am getting very concerned today in many things. I don't care whether it's autism stuff or it's animal stuff or it's environmental stuff or whatever, where we're getting policies made by people that are getting further and further away from out in the field applied. And you get a lot of blind ideology that doesn't transmit out into the field. I call it abstractification. I mean, look at the gridlock in government. You know, in the 50s and 60s, government actually did things, actually got stuff done. It didn't matter whether it was Democrats or Republicans. They were both able to get stuff done. Now it's just tied up in gridlock. You know, we've got our best and our brightest, playing around with stupid things like derivatives and credit default swaps. I would have liked to have seen all that stuff canceled myself. And when I found out what a derivative was, I just couldn't believe it. You see, I relate to visual things. How do I understand $1 billion? Well, the Denver airport, when it was built, cost $4 billion to build. It's probably worth $5 billion now. So if you have $100 billion, that's like 20 Portland airports. Portland Airport and Denver Airport, about the same size. So 100 billion is 20 airports. Okay, 1,000 billion, that's a whole lot more airports. You start looking at it in terms of real stuff. You know, the $3 trillion budget, I mean, it's like hundreds of airports worth of money. And that just disappeared into like the vapor world of casino banking. I wish they'd put that money into, infrastructure and research on energy and that kind of good stuff. Stuff that makes jobs too. But you see, I'm not an abstract thinker. You see, if I don't have a photorealistic picture, can't think. It's just that simple. But I can think about some rather abstract things. And let's just, for a little question right now, and I'll repeat it, I want somebody to ask me something really abstract, and I'll tell you how visual thinking thinks about it. And I'll repeat the key word because you won't be at a mic. Okay, give me a key word. Pretend I'm a computer. Give me a key word. Well, you certainly have, all right, what is it? You have to ask me to think about something. How many sides are on a sphere? Okay, I just saw a big, how many points are on a sphere? Or sides on a sphere? I'm going, can't have any. Because I'm now seeing like a big steel ball bearing in my mind. Okay, now I'm seeing other balls. I'm seeing a beach ball, a baseball, a soccer ball. I'm now in the ball file, a tennis ball. Now I'm seeing a spit-covered tennis ball that this dog is dropping in front of me. The most revolting spit-covered tennis ball you ever saw. And it doesn't have any points either. And now I'm saying throwing the tennis ball for the dog. Now we're getting into dog fight. But the first picture that came up was like a big steel ball bearing. You know, way back there was a balloon satellite called Echo. That was a great big like Mylar balloon. I saw that. And then I just saw, you know, three-dimensional round object. Okay, like a ball bearing. Okay, all right, I think what we're going to do now is we're going to get into questions. And we do definitely have to use the mics because it's the only way that the people in the other rooms can hear. And they're going to have to go to the mics to ask questions.
If you'd like to come to here at the mics and then we can alternate from one to the other.
Go ahead. No, you go first.
Dr. Grandin, do you still use your squeeze machine? And if you don't, what has changed that you no longer require it?
Well, it broke 2 years ago. I never got around to fixing it. But one of the things is I've learned, you know, I can hug people now. I mean, I've gradually get desensitized to touch. And I've also taken antidepressant medication. As I got through my 20s, the anxiety attacks got worse and worse and worse and worse. And, you know, the squeeze machine actually could no longer control it. And then when I took the antidepressant medication, that stopped this horrible, my nervous system being absolutely in fear. So imagine if we locked up this room and we put poisonous snakes in here. You don't have to spend the night in here with them. You'd just be always looking for danger. It would be absolutely, totally awful. You know, that's the way my nervous system was all the time. And another thing that helps me is exercise. I do 100 sit-ups every night on the bed, and I hate every single one of them. But I've been feeling a lot better since I've done that. But the other thing about being autistic is you gradually keep learning. People tell me my talks are better at age 60 than they were at age 50. You keep learning. It's like as I fill up the internet that's inside my head, the Google that's inside my head, the search engine in my head has more web pages to look through. Because to understand something in the future, I have to relate it back to the things that in previous experience. And in the movie, it shows all the stuff about doors. But you see, without a picture, I can't think. Now that I have more information in here, I don't need to do so much door stuff because I've got other experiences that I can relate to.
Hi, Dr. Grant. I have a question. My 8-year-old little boy is autistic. He's wonderful. He's high functioning. He does his stemming. When he gets very agitated, he will chew on his finger, or he will kind of hum kind of loud and flap his hands, and I can tell he is not at ease or something, making him very upset. And he's now not wanting to go to school. So I go to a school and I look. The carpet, besides being very ugly, is very loud. On the walls, there's posters all over that are bright. This side has...
well, he's one of the ones where the too much visual stimuli... You see, now for me, I had visual overstimulation was much less of a problem with me than with some other kids. This is where the sensory issues are variable. He may also have problems with fluorescent lighting. All right, let's talk about some simple things we can do for problems with visual processing. Some kids, when they look at print, it will jiggle on the page. Try colored glasses. You know, the Erlin colored glasses. What you do is you try on all these different colored glasses till you find the color where the print stops jiggling and the fluorescent lights don't bother you as much. Okay. Now, it costs a lot of money to do that, so the low-income way to do it is to go down to Walmart and try on what we used to call the hippie glasses. You know, the pinks, the light purples, the real pale colors. Take a book in there And I've had students come back saying, oh, I got an A on my economics quiz because now the PowerPoint slides weren't jiggling on the screen.
Yeah, and his stemming, there's so many times I will actually let him have his time, like you were saying, you
And
had
that's
an
fine.
hour.
And that's fine. I was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could stim. It's okay to have some downtime and allow some stimming. But if they're allowed to do that all day, they're not going to develop. An hour a day is fine. 8 hours a day is not.
That's how I feel, and he
That's right.
also has
That's
to
right.
mind manners, have manners, and
That's
behave.
right.
And I've seen so many children in his little classroom that are just crazy, aren't made to mind at home, aren't made to mind anywhere, and he's looking at this, and it's getting him completely out of sorts. But I really feel that there's so many parents that don't make their children mind.
Oh, I think you've got to teach manners. Manners were absolutely pounded into me. I'm appalled at the number of high-functioning, kids on the spectrum that were milder than I was, and their behavior in a store. Pull merchandise off the shelf, throw it on the floor. I never did that.
It's not
I was taught, like, you don't go behind the counters, you don't go in the back rooms. There was behavior in a store. And I could go shopping at a very young age and not misbehave in a store.
I'm very careful with him, but do you have a suggestion when we are somewhere and he stems and he bites and I try to just calm him down, I'll hug him? Is there something else I should have him do maybe with his hands?
Well, first of all, I want to try to figure out what the sensory issues are. Like the colored glasses can help on that. Wearing a hat also can block out some of the fluorescent lights. Is it noise? Some kids are smell sensitive. You got to figure out what sets them off. The other thing is when he gets tired, it's going to get worse.
It is worse.
And like right now, I'm tired, so the problem with the rapid motion right in front of me, like someone's fanning themselves in the front row, and I'm tired, that I can't block it out.
That's when I have him at home when we don't go anywhere. I'm very sensitive to his needs that way. I just didn't know.
And then there's other things, you get into like for treatments. I think special diets, everybody needs to try that. I mean, right now I'm doing gluten-free pretty much, low carbs, I got to like make a diet that I can travel with. Yeah. But I found that's helped my health. The other thing that's got very good science right now is fish oil supplements.
Okay.
They have good science behind them, and they're going to take at least 2 months to work because that has to be incorporated into the myelin and into the brain, and that takes time. You don't do fish oil and then have it work the next day. It takes a while for that to work. But they're getting extremely good science now behind them.
Oh, thank you.
And the diets are definitely worth trying. Gluten-free, casein-free, and get tons of sugar out.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Grandin, I had a question for you about dogs. I've been reading the Cesar Millan view of them, and I've had dogs, many, many dogs over the years, and reading Cesar and his interpretation of what the dogs are thinking and what motivates them is making me feel like I really shouldn't have dogs, because he talks so much about the pack mentality and the necessity of the person in the dog's life being a strong, assertive.
You see, the thing about Caesar is there's a certain kind of dog that he works brilliantly with. He's real aggressive, Rottweilers and things like that. Separation anxiety is useless, and I don't like some of the stuff he's done with fear. It's forcing a dog into something, and it just keeps growling. Or you've got a dog that can't walk on a slippery floor, and you're forcing it on. It can't walk on it. And these Great Danes and stuff, the floors were slippery. They physically can't walk on it. He's good with one particular kind of dog. A lot of the explanations I don't agree with. Professional scientists that work with dogs, I suggest that they watch Caesar with the audio shut off, because there are certain dogs that he really is brilliant with. Some of the Rottweilers, the Pit Bulls, he's very, very good at doing that. But you got a little dog that's scared, or a dog that's got separation anxiety, he doesn't know what to do with them. And I was pretty appalled at what I read in one of his Caesar magazines. I picked it up at the local drugstore. I didn't buy it, but I read this one article in it. And there was a dog was afraid of thunder, and he says, well, put it on the treadmill and have him force it to run on the treadmill, the speaker blasting a thunderstorm. I don't think that's the thing to do. I definitely agree with him making sure dogs get plenty of exercise.
Right.
Just like I recommend.
Well, and then his other two
everybody
legs of his stool seem to be discipline and then love. And the discipline is, very firm, basically they're always going to be watching you to
Well,
get
the
away
other
with
thing-
whatever they can.
Well, the other thing is that you got to look at the dog personality. You know, if you have the Rottweiler, Pit Bull kind of pushy dog that's going to dominate you, then you got to do it Caesar's way. You got some other little dog that's got a little different personality, you don't have to worry about that stuff. Nick Dodman had a very nice book on choosing a puppy, where it got into where, okay, the Rottweiler type of dog, you got to make it obey. It wants something from you, it's going to have to obey. But you have some little scared dog, or you're like a border collie, real high energy. You don't want to treat a border collie that way. You're going to mess it up if you do that. I mean, dogs, you know, some are high fear, some are low fear, some are high seekers.
Okay, thank you.
Could we take a question at the back here?
Okay, all right.
I wanted to ask you, you know, you said a lot of times with animals it's fear, and I've been working and living with a canine by my side for 12 years now, 2 different dogs, and helped train 3 others. And my question is, how do you get people to admit that they honestly don't know what's wrong so that you can give them an idea? A good example would be when I got my current dog, who's down here by my side. I took her out for the first time at night, and she completely flipped out. She barked at everything. She was like, oh my God. I go back to the trainer and I say, well, you know, she freaks out at night. And they go, oh. And they took 2 other dogs out at night, and they all freaked out. They figured out they
Well,
didn't
maybe
take them out
maybe
at
they
night.
never trained them at night.
Exactly, and none of the other people who had gotten dogs from them were willing to admit that their dogs freak out at night because they were worried that that would mean that the dog would fail and they wouldn't get to keep it anymore.
Well, the problem is that you've got dog thinking is specific. So if you only train the dog to do the service dog functions in the daytime, it doesn't know what to do at night. The prisons are doing a lot of work on training dogs, and they have some odd fears. They get the dog outside the prison and it's scared to death of trees, because inside the prison there were no trees. You know, so the animal thinking is very specific.
I think we're at this mic over here.
Okay.
Dr. Grandin, thank you. I am wondering, you work a lot on the producer end of factory farms and various meat-producing farms, and from the consumer standpoint, we see a lot of labels such as free range and happy animal labels on meat products. And I'm wondering if you see those labels honestly reflected in practices on the farm, and especially in the only word I can think of is execution, which is not the word I'm looking for, but slaughter, thank you, and slaughter practices.
I think that it's going to vary. You know, some people do a better job of auditing. One company I really like is Country Natural Beef. That's a group of family ranchers, a couple hundred family ranchers. I think that's really legitimate. They've got a plant that's putting in the video auditing right now. That's another thing I've worked on is, okay, so I have an auditor go in the plant and score the handling, and they fake good through that. Now what's being done is putting video cameras in that go to third-party auditors sitting in a control room, and they can tune in several times a day and score it. Then there's no way for the plant to fake good on it. And that's, you know, you can put it, you don't say you just put video cameras in yourself and you say you're going to look at them. I find the novelty wears off. That's been done for 20 years. The novelty wears off. The cameras just sit there. They don't do anything. You know, they need to be monitored by a third party auditing company.
There's a gentleman with a hand held right here on your
Okay. Okay.
Is this on? Okay, now it is. In the 1970s, I worked in the Texas Panhandle and feedlots, in the pens and so forth, and we used the hot shots back then, you know,
Yeah.
tremendously. And I wasn't real crazy about using them, but once my coworkers, a lot of them literally would have play, you know, by shocking the
Shocking
herd,
cattle.
shocking the herd and everything.
Well, this is where you get down to management, and somebody needs to be
Right.
fired.
Should-
And you know, my feeling about hot shots is, it should never be in your hand as your primary tool, ever. You get an animal that absolutely won't go into the squeeze chute, you buzz it once, then you put the hot shot away. Now I want to show you a little movement pattern that you can do. This is your squeeze chute right here, and then here's the alley that leads up to the squeeze chute. You've got the animal standing in here like this. If you step forward here like this and then move back in this direction, you step forward like this, little movement pattern like this, and this is in my humane handling book. It's in that book. Do this little movement pattern. You can, and when you walk back past the point of balance, an animal's got a point of balance at the shoulder. And when you walk back past the point of balance, they go forward. Like, for example, if this was the tailgate of your squeeze chute, I step forward like this to walk back by the cattle like that. When I walk back by the shoulder line, the animal goes forward into the squeeze chute. And I find that by doing this, I could drastically cut down the amount of hot shots that were required to get cattle in squeeze chute. But on the other hand, I wouldn't recommend banning hot shots, because I've seen too many tails busted off and sticks stuck up in sensitive places and things like that. You know, a lot of this gets down to management. And there are certain people that should not be working with cattle. One of the things I learned when we were doing the McDonald's audits, these great big plants, they're double shifted. They had like 5 guys per shift moving cattle, just the cattle driving guys. In almost every single plant, they had to get rid of at least one person, because the minute your back was turned, the hot shot was out and they were doing something they shouldn't be doing. There's some people, I hate to say it, they should not be there.
One additional question. I also worked at in Amarillo, Texas at IBP. Did you do any design work for them or anything?
No, I didn't do any design work for them, but they've got my, actually I've done design work for them recently. About, I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago, they put in the center track restrainer system. Yeah. And I did work on that system. But the original IBP plant in the 70s, I did not work on that.
Okay.
They had a really nice facility.
World's largest, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, and IBP in Amarillo was better than a lot of other plants.
Ah.
Well, because the stuff that happened in other plants, I can tell you, was in the 70s. It's way worse than what happened at IBP, because Courier Holman actually did not like abuse of cattle.
Okay,
I'm not saying IBP was perfect, because it sure wasn't, but there was some other plants that were a lot worse, because I worked on them on construction, and they were just awful.
We'll take these last 3 people standing, and then we're going to ask Dr. Grandin to sign a few books. We don't want to wear her out completely, though, so I thought
4:30 is going to come fast off a plane that leaves at 6:15. Okay.
Oh. Thank you, and thank you for staying to answer our questions. I'm switching gears to humans, and
Okay.
I'm curious what you think the most important pieces that we can do are to make our schools function better. As a teacher who's received kids after bells, coming through crowded hallways that are chaotic.
Well, the
and,
thing is,
yeah.
that's so general, almost can't answer it. Okay, what are we going to do for young autistic children? 20 hours a week or more of intensive one-to-ones with an effective teacher. Everybody's going to fight over whether it's ABA or RDI or floor time. They'll fight over the method, but I want to emphasize effective teacher. And I find the effective teachers tend to mix the methods together. Everyone will agree on that. Okay, you get the smart kids in elementary school. Let's figure out what kind of mind they are. Take their fixations and broaden it out. He likes dinosaurs. Let's do math with dinosaurs. Let's read books about dinosaurs. Let's read about famous paleontologists. Take that fixation and broaden it out. One of the things that my science teacher did with me, he says, you want to find out why the squeeze machine relaxes you? You're going to have to look up things in the scientific literature. And he introduced me to journal articles, and the scientific literature, and introduced me to looking up scientific literature. And back then, there was no internet. You had to look them up in these great big books called like Psychological Abstracts, Index Medicus. We didn't even have a copier. You had to copy on the index cards the abstracts that we wanted and put them in recipe boxes. It was a lot of work back then. But the fixation drove that.
Hi, Dr. Grandin. Thank you for being here. I envy your relaxed speaking style. My question is, and as an early interventionist, we spend a lot of time focusing on teaching children the social rules, appropriate proximity, eye contact. Do you have any comments or suggestions that would help me and support our young children in learning to value social relatedness?
Well, you just have to teach social skills. You know, you just corrected every time I made a mistake, it was corrected, and that was, Mother would say that's rude. So then I put all that stuff like in the rude file. Shoving in lines, rude. Eating with your mouth open's rude. You got to take turns. But there's kind of an emotional relatedness they may not have. You can't date the geek out of the geek. And you shouldn't try to do that. We've got to, you know, the happy geeks are all out there in Silicon Valley. And the other thing that I found is I had friends who shared interests, like riding horses, you know, animal behavior. We need to be getting these kids into, you know, robotics club, theater, drama. And I think it's a real shame that the schools have taken out a lot of the hands-on courses, auto mechanics and music, and because these are the kind of things where a good teacher can really turn kids around. And we have a real shortage of science teachers. And Mr. Carlock got to be Dr. Carlock in the movie. I didn't tell him to correct that. I wanted him to have his honorary doctorate. I'll tell you right now. Mr. Carlock was a NASA space scientist. That was right, but he was not an accredited teacher. He did not have a teaching certificate. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous that somebody who's got a degree in chemistry can't just come in and teach a high school chemistry class. He can go down to community college and teach it. And I just read an article in the New York Times yesterday while I was in this whole airplane mess. They got left on the plane with the broken landing gear thing. That they're taking some of these high school seniors and putting them right into the community college, and they're getting in with some of those good teachers that can really stretch them and push them. Because now the kid's got a reason to study. You know, in the movie, I was challenged to make the optical illusion room. Well, that's what a good teacher can do. And they can really turn a lot of these kids around. And I think it's ridiculous that you have to study ed courses to teach high school biology. I'm not talking about working with elementary kids. I'm talking about stuff like high school biology, science. Yeah, they should have a degree in a scientific subject to teach science. Definitely.
Thank you.
To the book signing, and I ask your help in keeping that manageable because I think there will be a lot of people who want books signed. If we could have people come down this aisle on my right, that would be very helpful. Please do not expect to shake hands. Dr. Grandin does not want to get sick. She has a number of other meetings to move on to.
Well, I'm not. It was mainly
It was
you
me.
were the one
Okay,
that I
don't
told.
shake hands with me.
There's somebody that I know has a cold. I
So don't
want
shake hands with me for sure, okay?
Well, because you had and to make it worse, you had a fresh cold. It makes it more contagious.
So don't let me sneeze on you either.
No,
I
you're
should
not
also
supposed to.
say that so many books were sold that apparently there are only about 25 copies left here at the moment. So just to let you know what to expect. And if you wouldn't mind being brief in your introduction, in your interactions with Dr. Grandin, that way we can keep it fairly contained. Yes, we have an intervention?
Could we ask people who are not staying for a book signing to exit this door?
Okay.
And that'll keep that side of the room a little less congested. So
Excellent logistics. But we do have one last question, ma'am.
Okay.
I was wondering if consuming the meat of animals with high cortisol levels because of rough handling conveys to our cortisol levels as well.
Okay, good. No.
Do we eat fear? We don't eat fear.
You don't eat fear.
Okay.
No. If you rough up an animal 5 minutes before slaughter, it really wrecks the meat of pigs. You get pale, soft, watery meat. And in cattle, you get tough meat. You are not going to get, it will not raise your cortisol. It's cruel to the animal to do that.
Definitely, yes. Okay. Thank you.